Hello and welcome. You're watching Gravitas. My name is Priyanka Sharma. Here's what's coming up on the show today. When the landmark Roe versus Wade judgment was overturned in America, taking away the constitutional right to abortion, the world was shocked and concerned that this could set the tone for other countries to follow suit. We've seen angry protests, polarizing opinions, heated debate, all surrounding a woman's right to choice. Today, India's top court gave a landmark decision. The Supreme Court ruled that all women, I repeat, all women are entitled to a safe and legal abortion process. And this is our cover story on Gravitas tonight. We'll break down this judgment for you and tell you what this means for the women in India.
My choice! My choice! My choice!
Do you remember those protests? It was in response to a draconian ruling by the US Supreme Court. In one blow, millions of women lost control over their own bodies. They lost the right to abortion. Many feared it would be a slippery slope that more countries could follow the United States' lead. Luckily, that's not the case. The Indian Supreme Court has given a historic verdict. I know we throw that word around a lot, but this is truly historic. The court has ruled that all women have the right to abortion. The emphasis here is on the word all. It doesn't matter if you are married or unmarried, if your family agrees with you or not, if your partner approves or not. The choice of abortion belongs to the woman and the woman alone. Let me now quote from the verdict. The artificial distinction between married and unmarried women cannot be sustained. Women have autonomy to have free exercise of these rights. The fetus relies on the woman's body to sustain. Therefore, the decision to terminate is firmly rooted in their right of bodily autonomy. Until now, this wasn't the case. Abortions in India are regulated by a 1971 law. It's called the MTP Act, the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act. In 2021, it was amended by the Government of India. The gestation limit was increased. Let me now explain what that means. According to the earlier law, abortions were permitted between 12 and 20 weeks. 12 weeks on the advice of one doctor and 20 weeks on the advice of two doctors. The new amendment has raised this limit. Abortions are now permitted between 20 and 24 weeks. 20 weeks on the advice of one doctor, 24 weeks for special categories of women, like survivors of sexual abuse or minors, or in case of an unwanted pregnancy. But even with that amendment, there was confusion about one particular clause. Does it apply to unmarried women? Well, now we have that answer. India's right to abortion is not linked to marital status. Now keep in mind the context of this judgment. All over the world, there is a so-called conservative resurgence. Women are being denied the right to abort. Religious principles are being placed above personal liberties. The biggest example being the United States of America. Republicans are on a crusade to limit women's reproductive rights. What's worse, their top court is playing along. In 2021, we had Poland. The government there imposed a near-total ban on abortions. For weeks, we saw protesters marching on the streets of Warsaw. They opposed the restrictions on women, but no luck. Despite all the pressure from the public, despite all the pressure from the European Union, the law continues to stand. And then we have Hungary. Earlier this month, Hungary approved a fetal heartbeat law. What does this entail? Women must listen to the fetal heartbeat before the procedure. No prizes for guessing why this law has been introduced. Sort of like an emotional assault, if I may use that word. In Italy, women are marching for abortion rights. The country has elected a new right-wing government, but the fear is they will restrict abortion rights. We'll have to wait and watch. So that is the background of this verdict in India. We'll tell you why we're calling it historic. While the whole world is regressing when it comes to reproductive rights, India remains an exception. The judges also talked about marital rape in this judgment. It is a very controversial issue in India. Only 32 countries in the world do not punish spouses for marital rape, and India is one of them. But in this case, the court was pretty clear. Let me quote again from the verdict now. The meaning of rape must include the meaning of marital rape solely within the meaning of Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act and rules. Let me once again break down that statement for you. Assume that a woman was impregnated by her husband, but the act was not consensual. It was marital rape committed by the husband. Under the previous interpretation of the law, that pregnancy could not have been terminated. But not anymore. The court has ruled that pregnancies resulting from marital rape can also be aborted. But this observation is important. It's crucial. The Supreme Court is currently considering petitions to criminalize marital rape altogether, and today's verdict gives us a glimpse into the court's mindset. One statement from the Justice, D.Y. Chandrachud, stands out. Listen to this. A woman may become pregnant due to a non-consensual act by her husband. Sex and gender-based violence in all its form has been part of families. Like I said earlier, it's a progressive judgment to say the least. In fact, judiciaries across the world should take note of this. The court's job is to protect our personal liberties, to protect the rights of all citizens. Unfortunately, countries like the United States and Poland have failed to do just that. They are treating women like second-class citizens. Even from a technical standpoint, abortion bans do not work. You can criminalize it, but you cannot stop people from getting it. The result of these bans are illegal and unsafe abortions. We've touched upon this on the show before. Women end up going to underground clinics or unqualified quacks. They are forced to put their lives at risk. My question is, does this Supreme Court verdict protect Indian women from that? In theory, yes, we can say that. You have every right now to get a safe abortion. Married, unmarried, it doesn't matter. I repeat, it doesn't matter. But in practice, maybe not so much. Let's talk about the realities on ground. Let me show you some data. A 2018 study found that 15.6 million abortions are done every year. Remember, this is exclusively in India. And out of this, 78% were done outside of health facilities. So chances are, without any medical supervision, they were unsafe. Another report found that 67% of abortions in India are unsafe. 8 women die every day from such unsafe procedures. Just take a moment to think about these numbers. Needless to say, they are too high, especially for a country with progressive laws on abortions. So what can we do about this? Well, the Supreme Court has done its job. It has offered constitutional protection for women. But the next step must come from the society and the government. Even today, let's be frank, there is stigma associated with abortion. Doctors often refuse to perform the procedure. I could say the same about reproductive matters in general. Let me now give you a recent example. A senior IAS officer in the state of Bihar was addressing a forum on advancing women's rights. She was asked a question by one of the students. Can the government give us sanitary napkins at 20 to 30 rupees? You would assume that's a fair question. But now listen in to what the official had to say.
इस मांग का कोई अंत है? 20 और 30 रुपए का इस पर भी दे सकते हैं, कल को जीन पैंट भी दे सकते हैं, परसों को सुंदर जूते क्यों नहीं दे सकते हैं, नर्सों को क्यों नहीं कर सकते, और अंत में जब परिवार नियोजन की बात आएगी तो निरोध भी मुफ्त में ही देना पड़ेगा, है ना?
That statement in itself sums up the problem. While Western countries attempt to shackle women's bodies, India is liberating them as of now, giving them the right to choice through this verdict. That's why we are calling it historic. But that is only half the battle won. Implementation will be the key to real progress, and we'll have to wait and watch and see if that happens. Speaking of progress, progress requires one thing more than all else. Do you know what that is? Effort. In diplomacy, that means political will. Leaders must be willing to make an effort. If not, diplomatic relations will continue to worsen. Take Pakistan, for example. Every year, they bring the same broken record to the United Nations. They talk about Kashmir. They accuse India of human rights violation, and then they leave. This year, sadly, was no different. Our correspondent Anas Malik was in the United States tracking the Pakistani delegation. He managed to have an exclusive chat with Foreign Minister Bilawal Bhutto Zardari. Well, they did talk about Pakistan's relationship with India. Listen in now to Bhutto's response.
Strong bilateral relations with many countries, and we've had a stumbling block when it came to India. The stumbling block for India has been that after August 2019, the path to peace between our two countries has been incredibly difficult. It is important for us to have managing relationships with anyone, reasonable relationships with anyone, but as I said in the answer to the earlier question, that until August 2019 is addressed, even those who believe in a more extensive relationship with India will find it difficult to have that conversation.
You heard him. He keeps talking about August 2019. What exactly happened back then? In 2019, India abrogated Article 370 and ended statehood for Jammu and Kashmir. The region was divided into two union territories, Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. With this move, Kashmir lost its special privileges. It was brought to the same level as other Indian territories. But Pakistan was not too happy with this. It condemned India's decision. It also cut off normal trade relations with India. Remember, that was under former Prime Minister Imran Khan. Now there is a new regime in Islamabad. But the question is, will it be any different? Initially, there was some hope. Bilateral trade between India and Pakistan increased rapidly in the first quarter of this fiscal year. India's exports rose 72% from last year. So what explains this pivot? From a trade ban in 2019 to rising exports in 2022. The simple answer is the economic crisis. Pakistan was forced to import goods from India. But beyond that, is there any political effort? That's what we seek to answer. Once again, let's now turn to Bilawal Bhutto Zardari. A couple of days back, he was speaking at the Wilson Center in Washington. He was asked about Pakistan's policy towards India. Bhutto unleashed what can only be described as a rant. You have to hear it to believe it.
From our perspective, this is a very different India. Mr. Modi is not Mr. Manmohan Singh or even Mr. Vajpayee. He is the same Prime Minister who, until he became Prime Minister, could not come to the United States. You wouldn't give him a visa because of the massacre that occurred in Gujarat.
I will admit one thing, though, Pakistan has not changed at all in the last 7 decades. They sponsored terror groups in the 1950s. They continue to sponsor terror groups in the 2020s as well. Kudos of policy continuity, at least. And as for his arguments, both of them are unacceptable. Bhutto says that Article 370 is the big issue for Pakistan. First of all, the move in 2019 was India's sovereign decision. It does not concern Pakistan or any other neighbour for that matter. Secondly, such an argument ignores the past. Was Pakistan the perfect neighbour before 2019? We all know the answer to that question. So Article 370 is a convenient political argument for Pakistan. It has no legal or logical basis whatsoever. Let's now come to Bhutto's second issue. It is with the current Indian leadership. Again, it's none of his business. Unlike Pakistan, India is a democratic country which elects leaders with free and fair elections. We don't have generals lording over politicians. Plus, the current leadership has repeatedly tried to mend relations. Prime Minister Narendra Modi invited Nawaz Sharif to his swearing-in ceremony back in 2014. The next year, he made a surprise visit to Pakistan. It was the first by an Indian Prime Minister in more than 10 years. So how did Pakistan respond? With two brutal terror attacks in 2016. One in Pathankot and another in Uri. Most Indian governments have had the same experience. They try to take one step forward and Pakistan responds with proxy and terror attacks. My point is this: Bhutto has got the narrative completely wrong. Relations are worsening not because India has changed, they are worsening because Pakistan has not changed. Their army continues to drive their foreign policy. Their deep state continues to support terror groups. And that is the big issue on the Indian side, as it should be. Prime Minister Modi himself spelt it out. Terror and talks cannot go hand in hand. So if Pakistan is serious about normalizing ties, it must introspect. Big statements in the United States will not repair relations. Pakistan must make meaningful efforts and it must earn India's trust. But sadly, looking at the track record, I wouldn't hold my breath. Let's move on now and shift our focus to the United Kingdom. The UK too is currently in a state of flux. The mayhem in the markets continues. The pound has weakened. The IMF is openly criticising the government's plan to cut taxes, but the country's new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, is openly defending it. After maintaining her silence for several days, Liz Truss woke up this morning and hopped from one local radio station to the next. Her objective was clear. Truss wanted to reach out to the grassroots and defend her economic policies. But her statements do not inspire any confidence. Consider these quotes now. Britain is facing very, very difficult economic times. We had to take urgent action. We won't see growth come through overnight. What is important is that we are putting this country on a better trajectory. From stating the obvious to being defensive, Truss seemed to be completely out of depth. A member of her cabinet also struggled to defend her plans. Take a look.
The UK went into this with a strong balance sheet. Where
the UK is an outlier.
Our GDP
is an outlier here in financial markets.
Well, we've got a very strong balance sheet. The UK has the second lowest debt to GDP ratio in the G7. So get on and deliver that plan. That's what I, the Chancellor, and my colleagues in government are focused on: is getting on, delivering that growth plan.
It is good to chase growth, but are Liz Truss and her government out of touch with reality? Because her economic policy started this turmoil in the first place. Now the Bank of England has decided to intervene. It has announced an emergency action. The UK Central Bank has launched a £65 billion programme, or $69 billion. For the next 2 weeks, it will buy government bonds from the market. But why was this necessary? Britain's central bankers are concerned. Take a look at this press release now. It is from the Bank of England. I'm quoting. Were dysfunction in this market to continue or worsen, there would be a material risk to UK's financial stability. I repeat, a material risk to financial stability. Sounds like a doomsday scenario, doesn't it? Well, the situation is indeed serious. The Bank of England is concerned about the turmoil created by Truss and her new policies. Their impact on the market has been severe. Let's now decode that for you. Liz Truss is undertaking sweeping tax cuts, the biggest that the UK has seen since the 1970s. They are worth well over $48 billion. When the plan was announced, there was a huge sell-off in the markets. investors began dumping their holdings, especially the government bonds. And this is exactly what the Bank of England is worried about. Because the mass sell-off was like a vote of no confidence for Liz Truss and her government if the situation gets out of hand. The Bank of England is worried that the money could dry up, the flow of credit to business and households could fall, and that would further destabilize the British economy. It could fuel more inflation. Those are the exact reasons why the IMF is worried too. Yesterday on the show, we told you about this. The UK has suffered a rare and a stinging rebuke from the IMF. It asked London to reevaluate its economic policies. Think about this. When did you last hear a major economy like the United Kingdom being criticized like this? That too by the IMF. The Truss government's policies are being termed ridiculous, even a source of national embarrassment. Many are taken aback by the recent events unfolding, but there are still some who had anticipated this. I'm talking about the former Chancellor Rishi Sunak. Yes, the man who lost out to Liz Truss in the Conservative Party election. He had warned Truss against these very tax cuts. During one of the debates, those same words are now going viral on social media.
So I don't think the responsible thing to do right now is launch into some unfunded spree of borrowing and more debt. That will just make inflation worse. Liz, we have to be honest. We have to be honest. But borrowing your way out of inflation isn't a plan. It's a fairy tale.
We'll assume that Sunak is having the last laugh right now. He will not be attending the upcoming Conservative Party conference. Apparently, he wants to give Truss all the space she needs to own the moment. Not a good time to be in the limelight, we'll say. Politicians in the opposition are now trying to put the government on the mat. Listen in.
This is a government that on Friday took the reckless action which lost control of the economy. And for what? To cut taxes for those who are earning hundreds of thousands of pounds, and now so many working people across the country are facing trouble with their mortgages, trouble with their prices. So this is really serious.
It is serious indeed. The British government now has its task cut out. Not only does it need to stabilise the British economy, it also needs to restore trust of the international investors. But Liz Truss remains adamant she still wants to walk on the same path. But the longer this crisis continues, the harder it will be for her government to justify its own policies. Let's move on now. Europe at large is dealing with its own economic shocks. Already leading economies are sliding into a recession due to the war in Ukraine, and now the region's gas supply could be disrupted. A new leak has now been discovered. Another leak has now been discovered at the Nord Stream pipelines. That takes the total number to 4. A bitter blame game has begun. Both Europe and Russia are hinting at sabotage. So what really happened to the Nord Stream? Our next report tries to find some answers.
The Baltic Sea is bubbling. The Nord Stream pipelines, which run below the surface of these waters, are leaking gas. Multiple leaks have been discovered in just a few days. They have triggered a new wave of geopolitical turmoil. European leaders are convinced. They say the Nord Stream pipelines were sabotaged.
Ce que je peux dire aujourd'hui, c'est qu'évidemment,
everything is being done to try and identify the origin of these events and of the explosions on the pipelines.
Russia has its own theory. Moscow believes it was state-sponsored terrorists who targeted the supply lines.
However, the unprecedented nature of this event, which looks like an act of terrorism, possibly on a state level, requires very active, full-throated cooperation.
Europe and Russia are at each other's throats over the war in Ukraine. But for a change, they seem to agree on one thing. The Nord Stream leaks are a result of foul play, and perhaps the only plausible explanation for the damage to the pipelines. The circumstantial evidence is mounting. Seismologists in Sweden have captured compelling data. they recorded 2 explosions near the area where the pipes are leaking.
The first one yesterday morning at 02:03 Swedish time, southeast of the island of Bornholm. And then last night at 19:04 Swedish time, we detected a slightly bigger blast northeast of Bornholm. And this latter blast, we've now determined the magnitude at the magnitude 2.3, equivalent to an earthquake.
The other telltale sign is the nature of the leaks. Even a single leak on a gas pipeline like the Nord Stream is rare. 3 leaks in one day is next to impossible, according to experts.
One might be an accident. That could be a solution if there would be only like one leakage. But if we look at the fact that we have 3 leakages that occurred almost simultaneously, then it's most likely that it's sabotage.
And now, in less than 24 hours, officials have found another leak. This means the Nord Stream pipelines are now damaged in 4 different areas. This has ignited a diplomatic firestorm. There's no smoking gun evidence yet, but unofficially, many in Europe are accusing Russia of sabotage. The region remains on the edge. The leaks have once again reminded European leaders of their biggest vulnerability: the shortage of alternative sources for gas. WION, World is One.
The 29th of September, exactly half a century ago on this day, 2 countries decided to put their differences aside and normalize ties. These 2 countries were China and Japan. On the 29th of September in 1972, they signed a landmark agreement in Beijing and agreed to establish diplomatic ties. Until that point, the 2 nations were sworn enemies. They shared cultural values but had opposing interests. This treaty converged the 2. Today marks the 50th anniversary of this agreement, the 50th year of the normalization of ties. In these 50 years, China and Japan have become Asia's biggest economies. They're considered vital to the region's stability and prosperity. But in our story today, I want to ask, is there anything normal between them currently? Are the 2 even friends? If we look at it from the lens of business, yes, the 2 countries do enjoy good ties. For instance, in 2021, China was Japan's biggest trading partner. Japan was China's 2nd biggest trading partner, with the total volume of trade standing at $372 billion. If we break it down further, in 2021, the value of Japanese exports to China stood at $206 billion. The value of Japanese imports from China was $165 billion. If we speak of China, in the last 25 years, its exports to Japan have risen at the rate of 7.36% annually. They've gone from $22.5 billion in 1995 to more than $133 billion in 2020. In 2019, before the pandemic broke out, Japan and China also enjoyed incredible people-to-people ties. The number of people traveling to China from Japan stood at 12 million. While Japan welcomed nearly 10 million visitors from the mainland. This is the highest number among all foreign visitors to the 2 countries. That's not all. Over the 50 years of their ties, Japan and China have signed more than 250 Friendship City agreements, as they are called. Besides this, the 2 are also part of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Pact, or the RCEP, a free trade agreement between 14 Indo-Pacific countries. They're also part of the Beijing-Tokyo Forum, an annual event for diplomatic ties between the 2 sides. In October last year, this forum convened for the 17th time. The 2 are also part of the Japan-China ROK Trilateral Summit, which is an annual summit that takes place between China, Japan and South Korea. Its 8th annual summit was held in December in 2019. Why am I telling you all this? Because despite enjoying good business ties, the 2 don't really get along diplomatically. They're engaged in a series of territorial disputes. They have disagreements over the status of Taiwan. and they share a mutual distrust for each other, mainly due to military activities in the South China Sea. If we speak of territorial disputes, the Senkaku Islands are a big bone of contention. Located in the East China Sea, these islands are claimed by both sides. Japan says it owns them under international law, while China insists that they were stolen by Japan in 1985. Last we checked, the dispute persists. Fishing boats from both sides routinely clash in the waters of these islands. Coming now to the second bone of contention, Taiwan. China wants to annex it. Japan wants to protect it. This has upset Beijing. It has increased its military drills near Japanese coasts. And in response, Tokyo is shifting its own military posture towards southwest Japan, just a few miles from Taiwan. In recent months, Chinese missiles have fallen within Japan's exclusive economic zone. Tokyo has protested vehemently against these maritime violations. The war in Ukraine has further deepened the divide, with Japan joining Western allies to oppose Russia and China avoiding criticizing Moscow at any cost. So 50 years since the normalized ties, China and Japan seem to share a relationship of convenience. They do business and trade to boost their respective economies. But when it comes to political matters, the two are far from being friends. Right, let's now shift our attention to Iran, a story that we on Gravitas have been tracking and have been getting you the latest updates. Mass protests have now gripped the country. Iranian security forces have tried to crush them. So far, they have failed. The deaths of more than 70 people have triggered more protests against the Iranian regime worldwide. And today, Iran's president, Ibrahim Raisi, issued a fresh warning to protesters. He condemned what he called chaos in the country. But how will the people of Iran react to Raisi's statement? Will the protests now intensify further? Our next report has all the details.
Even with government crackdowns and a mounting death toll, the unrest in Iran is showing no signs of slowing. The anger against the Iranian regime goes well beyond the borders of the country. From London, a former Iranian detainee sent a bold message to Tehran.
برای سیامک، برای چشمان زیبای ریرا، برای پریسا، برای مادرم، برای دخترم گیسو، برای زهرا، برای کسرا، برای ترس سلول انفرادی، برای ترس هایی که از واقعیت بزرگترند، برای زنان سرزمینم، برای آزادی، برای عدالت.
From Turkey to Greece, the United Kingdom, Germany, and even in Argentina. Protesters all around the world have taken to the streets to show their support and solidarity for the people of Iran. But none of this seems to have changed the opinion of Ibrahim Raisi. The Iranian president today issued a warning to the protesters.
Look, the security of people's lives and belongings is a red line for the Islamic Republic. We cannot allow assaults against people's life and belongings. We can't allow some people to create chaos and disturb the security of the society.
But the threats are not working. The momentum is firmly behind the protesters. The unrest in Iran began with the death of Mahsa Amini, the 22-year-old who died in police custody. She was held for breaching Iran's strict hijab law. Amini's death catalyzed these massive protests nearly 2 weeks ago. Popular artists, celebrities and even athletes have voiced their support for the campaign. Now even Iranian men are joining these protests. The Iranian football team was playing a practice match in Austria. Before the game began, the team gathered for the national anthem. The Iranian team covered their sport jerseys with black jackets. The jackets covered up the emblem and the colours of Iranian flag. These protests have snowballed into a mass movement. They represent the biggest challenge the Iranian regime has faced in years. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Now let me ask you a question. Are you planning a trip to the United States? Or are you looking to apply for a visa? Then get ready to be disappointed because you may end up crossing calendars. Here's why. In India, the average waiting time for a visitor visa to the United States is now 800 days. 800 days. That's more than 2 years. Meaning, if you apply for a visa this month, you may not get an appointment until 2024. Let me break it down further. It gets worse. According to the US State Department website, if you're booking a visa appointment from the US Embassy in New Delhi, you may have to wait 833 days for a visitor visa. If you're applying for a student or exchange visitor visa, you will have to wait 430 days. And for all other non-immigrant visas, the waiting period is 390 calendar days. It's the same story in other cities as well. If you're booking an appointment at the US consulate in Hyderabad, for instance, you'll have to wait 582 calendar days for a visitor visa, 430 calendar days for a student visa, and 219 days for other non-immigrant visas. In Mumbai, the situation is no better. The waiting time for a visitor visa is 848 days. For a student visa, 430 days and 392 days for other non-immigrant visas. It's a pattern. It's a visa nightmare, to be honest. No matter which Indian city you live in, you'll have to wait till 2024 to get a visa. Naturally, this has put a lot of Indians in a fix. Students especially, the ones wishing to study in American universities. They're confused if they should wait for their slot or simply consider studying in another country. So who's to blame for this dilemma? Why can their visas not get processed immediately or at least faster? Why is it taking US embassies and consulates so very long? And the answer to all these three questions is the pandemic. It has created massive backlogs at the embassies. You see, when the pandemic hit us, the lockdowns began and travel got restricted. Most of these embassies ceased operations. They stopped assessing the applications. Forget approving them. 2 years on. This has led to a high volume of pending applications, a limited availability of appointments, and stretched visa processing timelines. Some countries have also tightened their rules for granting visas. Their process now involves more checks, like verification of vaccination certificates. All of this explains this logjam. But the question is, what's the solution? Analysts say there is none. Besides waiting for the backlog to clear, that is what experts say. But in the age of technology, where everything is digitized, especially in the developed world, visa backlogs, that too, at American embassies, it sounds appalling to say the least. What's even more appalling is that other countries face no such problem. Take the case of China. In its capital, Beijing, the waiting time for a visitor visa is just 2 days. 2 days for a student visa and 3 days for other non-immigrant visas. And why just Beijing? Even in Shanghai and Guangzhou, you won't have to wait for more than a week for a visitor or a student visa. Naturally, this begs some uncomfortable questions. Why do Indians have to wait for 2 years for a US visa, but the Chinese get it in a matter of days? Why this disparity? It's a question the US State Department ought to answer, and quickly. India is already pursuing the matter. It is pushing America to clear the jam. At a recent press conference in Washington, India's Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar raised the issue of visas, reminding America about the damage it was doing to people-to-people ties. He said this in presence of US State Secretary Antony Blinken. Listen to this.
On mobility, specifically visas, This is particularly crucial given its centrality to education, business, technology, and family reunions. There have been some challenges of late, and I flag it to Secretary Blinken and his team, and I have every confidence that they will look at some of these problems seriously and positively.
So did Blinken respond to India's concerns? Yes, he did. He said he was extremely sensitive about the matter and has readied a plan specifically for India. A plan that will play out in the coming months. Take a look.
We have a plan when it comes to India to address the backlog of visas that's built up. I think you'll see that play out in the coming months, but it's something that we're very focused on. These connections, these people-to-people ties, whether it's students, whether it's business people, whether it's tourists, whether it's family, this is what really links us together, and the last thing we want to do is make that any more difficult.
So India has flagged its concerns. America has decided to address them. Here's hoping the issue is resolved soon, and we get some important answers as to why people in China, which happens to be a sworn enemy of the United States, are getting their visas immediately. But people from India, which is a close strategic ally for America, are not. That's something to think about. Let's now put the spotlight on the United States again. Our next story is about the hurricane. The country has been battered by what's being called the most dangerous storm to hit the US in years. No points for guessing. I'm talking about Hurricane Ian. The storm has cut electricity supply to more than 2 million homes and businesses. We've seen the visuals through the day. Cities are flooded, cars have drowned, and people are trapped inside their homes. Our next report brings you up to date with what's happening in Florida.
Terrifying, isn't it? This is just a glimpse of how strong Hurricane Ian was when it hit Florida. The Category 4 storm made landfall 5 minutes past 3 in the afternoon, and soon the state looked like this. The streets were flooded, people were trapped in their homes, a hospital's roof had been blown off. The ocean was roaring. This was the condition of a fire station.
Are you guys okay?
Its first floor was inundated, and there was at least 3 feet of water. Currently, the town of Fort Myers is nearly submerged. Several people had to be evacuated to hotels. Tourists visiting Florida found themselves stranded at airports. Glenn and Christine Williams are from London. They were evacuated from their Tampa hotel, but when they arrived at the airport, they were told that they couldn't fly out until the 30th of September.
Unfortunately, all the hotels are full or closed, so it looks as though we're going to be in one of the shelters.
2.4 million homes and businesses are currently without electricity. State Governor Ron DeSantis is calling it the biggest flood event that Southwest Florida has ever seen.
In some areas, we think it's hit 12 feet. Now, it is our meteorologists' view that the storm surge has likely peaked and will likely, be less in the coming hours.
Hurricane Ian has now been downgraded to a tropical storm. As of earlier this evening, it was still moving through Florida. The storm is expected to reach Georgia and South Carolina in the next 24 hours. Several American states have already declared emergency, including Virginia, Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. The Biden administration says it is ready to help in every single way possible.
Evacuate when ordered. Be prepared. The storm warnings are real, the evacuation notices are real, the danger is real, and when the storm passes, the federal government's going to be there to help you recover.
But should this help stop at rebuilding? Experts are pointing at the root cause of these dangerous hurricanes.
As our atmosphere warms, that warmer air can hold more water vapor. And so this is the same reason that we expect rainstorms in general, not just hurricane-associated rainstorms, to become more intense as the climate warms.
Global warming is the real problem that the world must address. You know why? Because just look at the extent of the damage a single hurricane can do. This is Cuba a day after it was battered by Hurricane Ian. And this is the United States of America. The world's richest country is enveloped in darkness. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Clearly, everything's not well with the world. There is a war. There are natural disasters. The global economy is in shambles. Not exactly the best time to be alive. Trying times like these often take a toll on us. It stresses us, makes us feel anxious. What happens then? Our heart suffers. So before I end the show tonight, I want to take a few minutes aside to remind you to take care of your heart. It shouldn't need a reminder, but here we are. It is the 29th of September and it is World Heart Day. And I want to tell you tonight that nothing is worth compromising your heart's health. That no matter what, you must put your heart first. Heart problems or cardiovascular problems are the leading cause of death globally. In 2019, for example, 17.9 million people died of heart-related problems. 85% of these deaths were because of a heart attack or stroke. These numbers are from the World Health Organization, and these numbers are preventable. All we need to do is take care of our heart, but it's easier said than done. How do we do that? By making little changes in our day-to-day lives. To begin with, try and give up fried food, or at least eat it in moderation alone. Eat fiber-rich diet instead. Be physically active. Work out for at least 30 minutes a day. Take the stairs instead of using the elevator. Walk to your neighborhood grocery store instead of taking your car out. It's good for you and the climate. Get adequate sleep, and by adequate, I mean at least 8 hours. I repeat, easier said than done. Quit smoking. Reduce your intake of alcohol. And perhaps the one advice that you'll hear every day, reduce stress. It is important that you protect your heart from every possible stressor. You know, we often talk about heartbreaks, be it in reference to personal relationships or professional. When things don't go our way, we tell our friends that we feel heartbroken. What if I told you today that a broken heart is a proper, legal, legit condition and not just an expression? It's been documented. You know the shortness of breath you feel, the chest pain when things go south. Well, these are signs of a legit broken heart syndrome. A broken heart can be triggered by a breakup, a divorce, the loss of a loved one, a scary medical diagnosis. Heartbreaks mirror a heart attack. You feel a very similar chest pain. The Cleveland Clinic says 2% of suspected heart attack cases also have broken hearts. Experts say 2% is an underestimation. The Cleveland Clinic adds that about 1% of people with broken hearts have died. So what does this tell you? That a heartbreak can lead to death, just like a heart attack can lead to death. So while you take active measures to avoid a heart attack, you must also try to not put yourself in situations that can break your heart. I repeat yet again, easier said than done, because if you're a woman and you are past 50, you must be extra careful. Studies have shown that as women age, the level of estrogen in their body declines. So even a not so stressful event can trigger a heartbreak. We often channelize heartbreaks into rigorous exercises. We take it as a challenge to shred our bodies. Revenge body, they call it. We go on deadly diets, work out day and night, sweat out our sadness and frustration. Now, you may want to rethink that. While exercise is good for your heart, as is a low-fat diet, excessive exercising or dieting takes a toll on your heart. In recent months, we have seen numerous instances of young people dying of heart attacks. Actors, sportsmen, some of the fittest people, they're icons that we look up to. They have died of heart-related problems. This is something we have been speaking about on this show regularly, and each time we spoke to doctors about it, they invariably told us that balance is the key to protecting our hearts. So nothing wrong in channeling your grief into workouts, but you must know when to stop. Moderation. So let this World Heart Day be a reminder to avoid anything that can put your heart at risk. Fight obesity, control your cholesterol levels, get regular checkups, keep your blood pressure in check. And if you have a family history of heart diseases, then pay regular visits to your doctor. Don't be physically inactive. I know a Sunday spent on the couch is often needed to de-stress from the week. But don't make inactivity and lethargy into your lifestyle. Definitely indulge in your monthly pizzas, but try and maintain a healthy diet for the rest of the month, because nothing, I repeat, nothing is worth risking your heart. So exercise balance and take care of your heart. And with that, it's a wrap on the show. Thanks for watching Gravitas with me, Priyanka Sharma, leaving you as always with Gravitas images. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.